All right, it's 8 o'clock. Is everyone ready to go and get going? No? Hey, I feel you. I'm not ready either. It's truthfully, like, I have labs all day on Tuesday. Well, because all of you saw me if you came. So I mean, pretty much everyone did. And I'm always like wicked tired on Wednesday mornings, but I'm gonna fake it right now. So it's gonna be good. This is one of my favorite lectures. Because I actually know a lot of the people that wrote the papers. So like Booth et al. Like 2002. Well, it's not et al. It's the other guy's name. I just can't say his name. I actually know him. He's the mentor of my mentor. He's a really fun guy. I might tell some stories about him today. I might not. It depends on how far we get. But exercise, evolution, and genetics. Here's kind of the overview of what we're going to be talking about. Compared to the last lecture, common measurements, very like mathematical, a lot of stuff for you to like memorize. So like work, what's the equation for work? Anybody know? Force times distance, exactly. What are the units for all of those? For work, what's the unit for that? Joules, yes, yes. What's the unit for force? Newtons, yes. How about distance? Meters, yes. What's the equation for power? Work over time, right? Yeah? Hell yeah, all right, good. Good. All right, what's the unit for power? Watts. Excellent. Good. So good stuff. Like a lot of mathematical stuff there. This lecture is actually a little bit more philosophical. There are some things I'm going to try to expose you to. If you haven't like heard of different like evolutionary theories like punctuated equilibrium or like Lamarckian like transference of like genes or whatever, I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. In particular in the context of exercise. So starting off, like I'll talk a little bit about human history. Now granted, I'm not a historian or like an anthropologist or like a paleoanthropologist or whatever that is, but I think it's going to make sense here in a little bit. Different evolution types, evolution and exercise, some shortcomings of, bless you, typical exercise research, something that I think it's going to be really important for us to know going forward, and especially if you take, say, like my research methods class, if it's still offered whenever you get around to it. Because a lot of research, it's difficult to interpret it because of the control groups that they use, and we'll talk about some human physiology with that there. I'll talk a little bit about genetics, different parts of the cell that I find relevant for us to know, how genetic signaling works overall. Really, in terms of exercise adaptation, something that I'm going to want you to know, like don't write any of this down yet. I'll point you to the parts that I want you to memorize like throughout the lecture. But in terms of endurance adaptation or strength and muscle mass adaptation, there's really only a few boxes that you actually have to tick. So for example, to have endurance adaptation, you just need to trigger mitochondrial biogenesis. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to tell you what it is later and how to trigger it. So really overall, like exercise is a lot simpler than most of us think, but after this set of like 2 lectures, I'm going to go and like try to make it a whole lot more complicated and everything to come. And then some notes about the human genome, and I'm going to look at the papers throughout because there's 3 papers I wanted you to read. At the very least, skim them and look at the figures within them. So starting off, what I want to ask, who in here actually likes to exercise? A few people? Okay, cool. Like, I'm kind of skeptical of that. So what if you exercised, but you never looked any better? What if you exercised and only got fatter, or only got less strong, or less endurance, or whatever you're actually training for? So the point here is that we really didn't adapt to like exercise. There's almost no evolutionary benefit to enjoy sprinting constantly. Like, does anybody like look at your apps on your phone of like how many miles you walk every day? Anybody? Someone say something. I don't know. Sure? Excellent. How many miles does everyone in here walk every day? About? What do you think? The average is about 2 or so. 2, 3, something like that. Now, all of y'all being college students, it might be a little bit more than that. But here, I'll go back to this, kind of get more on topic. That was an aside that I really shouldn't be talking about right now. So over the course of human history, it didn't matter if you liked exercise or not, because we essentially had to. I don't know if anyone's ever seen any figures like this. So like the Stone Age, the like Old Paleolithic period, the New Paleolithic period, the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, all of that type of stuff, we never had labor-saving devices during any of those times. So if you're going to eat ice cream, there wasn't any ice cream. You had to like chase down a mammoth, punch it in the face until it died, then you could finally get to eat it, right? Or you had to run to many tribes over to find the few berries that haven't gone rotten yet. Does that make sense to everybody? So essentially, it kind of looked like this. Like old cave people, which, you know, that's essentially all of us. Genetically not very different than like late Paleolithic people. Just lifting rocks and running like sprints around like their outer tribe all day. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? Not like I'm joking, of course. Like basically it was all hunting and gathering. Is everyone good with this? That makes sense? So that's going to tie into everything that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. So here, evolution. First stuff for you to write down. And I'm just going to read this to you. Evolution is change in the heritable traits of biological populations over successive generations. Evolutionary processes give rise to diversity at every level of biological organization, including the level of species, family, order, phylum, kingdom, and so on and so forth. Individual organisms and even molecules and proteins within individuals that interact with these molecules. So I'm sure everyone here has seen the Punnett square, right? Has everyone seen this? Yeah. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but I'm not really going to get into the, you know, various complications of like mitosis and like everything with that, like telomerase and everything going together. Now this, you don't have this slide. I want you to write this down. With evolution, there's numerous theories, but here are two that I want you to be aware of. Phyletic gradualism or punctuated equilibrium. So kind of the idea here. With phyletic gradualism, if everybody knows like kingdom, phylum, order, family, so on and so forth, I don't remember how taxonomy works exactly. I haven't taken a class in generations. But overall, what this means is there's just gradual changes over time, and it essentially leads from like Homo habilis to Homo erectus to Homo sapien and whatever. Or like chimpanzee to bonobo chimpanzee to finally us, or something like that, if you're interested in anything like that. Now on this other side, there's punctuated equilibrium. This one I'm a little bit more partial to because it kind of makes sense to me. The idea is that species are a certain thing until kind of a catastrophic event happens. So say like climate change, for example, or there's new access to different land, or there's new access to a different type of calories. So here's one that kind of makes sense. Since it's Wisconsin, basically all of y'all are lactose tolerant, right? No? Maybe? I mean, I am, so that's the only person that matters in here. So it's joking, of course. Joking, of course. So here, I don't want you to so much think about species. I want you to think about like little mechanisms within a given species to confer advantage. So does anybody know about like the Mongolians? Okay, kind of like Genghis Khan, right? Like, okay, do y'all know anything? Right? Right? So, okay, everyone knows that the Mongolians like took over like a lot of the world, right? Part of the reason for that is they actually developed kind of like lactase persistence. So that's an enzyme that breaks down lactose. So they were able to get a new source of both fluid and amino acids from like yak milk or whatever, whereas like most of like the Han Chinese at the time were mostly eating rice, a little bit shorter and all of that type of stuff. So the Mongolians were able to like drink milk, and think about back then. If you can drink milk versus drinking water, you're probably not getting malaria. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? So like that is a certain type of evolutionary change that confers massive benefit to where now they're taking over all sorts of things. Now, this happens a lot with exercise as well, and like I'm going to get into that just a little bit. One of the most classic examples talking about genetics, who's heard of sickle cell anemia? Right, all of us have heard of this. Now, this is really important in numerous ways because it really shows how small of a thing can be altered to have like a pretty massive effect. So if you know anything about like nucleotides and codons, only one single nucleotide is actually changed, and that completely changes how a red blood cell works. Now, something you might not know about this, I assume most of you who've taken biology classes do know. If you only have one copy of this like sickle cell mutation, that actually protects you against malaria. Whereas if you have two, you get the full-on like full-blown sickle cell. That's probably the dumbest way I could say that, but that's all right. That's all right. Now, what I want to take from this is, well, clearly, if we alter different like amino acids or how like a red blood cell works, what do red blood cells carry on them? Relevant to exercise. Does anybody know? Oxygen. Yes. So if we have a mutation there that renders these not super functional, do you think that might have an impact on like exercise or like aerobic capacity, like chasing down yaks or mammoths or what have you? Okay, so like very little things like this can change all the time. All right, I'm going to move on just a little bit. Overall, thinking about this, whenever we change one letter within the genome, how can this be such a big deal? Does anybody have any idea? I want you to write this down. Amino acids. Well, like, don't write all of this down. Don't write all of this down. Like that's entirely too much. I know you don't have this. Amino acids have different shapes and charges. And amino acids are the building blocks of life. Has everyone heard that before? Amino acids are the building blocks of life. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Just, you know, different like cult things that you should have memorized. Now, if we're looking at this, hopefully everyone knows what the word nonpolar, charge, and polar actually mean. So going back, the normal protein, that's glutamic acid. Glutamic acid right here, hopefully everyone sees that. Whenever you change it from an A to a T, we get a different protein called valine, one of the branched chain amino acids. So here, those two. If we change one nucleotide, then we get a negatively charged amino acid to a nonpolar, like not charged amino acid. And this is all within a superstructure of a given protein. So does everyone know how magnets work? Right? Like positive and negatives like come towards each other. And so all of these amino acids have a charge or a polarity or something like that. So if we change one, it can make it to where, going back here, this hemoglobin, or red blood cell, collapses in on itself. Now, the reason I'm talking about this, outside of the oxygen carrying capacity, it doesn't really seem to be all that related to exercise. But this is one particular amino acid being changed and one particular protein that's collapsing on itself. And just here, I wanted to talk about how different mitochondrial changes. So mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, everyone knows this. This is how we make like the most amount of ATP. And I'm going to like belabor these points to death in the bioenergetics lectures. But there are so many proteins and amino acids that are subject to mutation and change just within here. So let's look at something real quick, like getting fatty acids into a cell. How could that be a good thing? So getting fatty acids into fat cells, that's not awesome because it makes your fat bigger. But if we get it into a muscle cell, we can burn that for energy, and then we burn fat, then we're leaner. We look good on spring break because that's coming up. You know, start dieting now, right? So up here, this fatty acid, that's called fatty acid translocase, or CD36, depending on what books you read on that. We could have numerous changes just in that. So over the course of evolutionary history, there were individuals that had a crappy fatty acid translocase gene or protein, and then somebody, for whatever mutative reason, got a good one, and now all of us can break down fat better because of that. Because of our haplotypes, where we come from and all that type of stuff. Does that make sense to everybody? So it goes deep down to this level, right? And within the mitochondria, you might not know this, but within the mitochondria, there's 5 complexes to it, 5 big deal protein complexes. If you have slightly more expression of one of them, you're better at burning fat. If you have slightly more expression of another one, you're better at burning carbohydrates for energy within a muscle. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? Isn't that crazy? No? I mean, looking at all of you right now, I have no idea what your mitochondria look like. But, in lab, we're actually going to kind of test it in some ways by making you try to run to death. But whatever. Okay. So there, hopefully you understand the phylytic gradualism. And here, just call it gradualism. Phylytic, that's kind of a $5 word that I don't really care if you use. And punctuated equilibrium, hopefully you know what both of those mean. That might be an essay question on a test. Might be. Beyond that, 2 types of evolution that I want you to be aware of. So both phylytic and punctuated equilibrium, that's more or less the time course of it. But 2 types of evolution I want you to know. First, Darwinian, so Charles Darwin, wicked smart guy, all of that type of stuff. I mean, there's Darwin Day every year, and I mean, I don't celebrate it, but I know some people do. Darwin evolution, also called natural selection, it's more or less survival of the fittest. In this context, fitness just means your propensity or ability to transmit your DNA into the next generation. That's all fitness is. So, something in particular about this that I want you to be aware of, right, is your ability to either get people pregnant or to get pregnant. Is that necessarily a good thing? No, no. I mean, it depends on what we're even talking about, right? So within this context, it is a good thing if we're just trying to get more copies of your genes into the next generation. But there's a lot of weird stuff that comes along with that, like impulse control, for example. So throughout most of human history, in the late Paleolithic era, thinking about, oh, am I going to have enough I don't know, gold to pay for my kid's college, they never thought about that, right? These days we do. So kind of impulsive or impetuous behavior was actually selected for throughout most of time, or binge eating was selected for throughout most of time. Because if you ever came across a bush full of berries, well, we have to eat all of it until we get sick. Now that's not adaptive anymore, but that is how we evolved overall. Does everyone get this? Does that make sense? So we're kind of competing with, I don't know, this more or less reptilian hardware within our brain. Another type of evolution that I want you to be aware of, Lamarckism or Lamarckian inheritance. This one has fallen out of fashion quite a bit, but I think it's interesting to know about, and I'm going to tell you about a particular instance where this may have actually happened to humans. So you can read this, whatever, doesn't really matter. This is the typical figure that illustrates it. So Lamarck, he was very interested in crabs for whatever reason. Maybe he lived in Maine. I doubt it, though. So say you have a given crab. They exercise one particular claw. That claw hypertrophies get very large. And then that large claw gets transmitted to the next generation of crab babies, right? Now, this likely isn't how it works at all, but that's kind of an idea behind it. What I wanted to talk about in relation to this is something called the Dutch hunger winter. So everyone knows like World War II like happened? Okay, good, good. Okay, so there was so like Germany, the Nazis, all that type of stuff, they funneled food away from the Netherlands or like the Dutch peoples. So essentially, everybody was starving over the course of this one winter. But there were a lot of people that like got pregnant, had babies, and everything during that time. Now, those babies, here's a question. Whenever they grew up and got older, are they disproportionately overweight and obese? Or are they disproportionately skinny? What do y'all think? Skinny? Okay, like why would you guess that? Yeah, like that's actually what I wanted Nick to say, because this is counterintuitive. Now, Nick's wrong, but very good guess. They're actually almost all type 2 diabetics, all very overweight. Now, how this happened, in kind of like, almost like, I don't know, a Lamarckian transition type of way, the amount of nutrient transporters that these like babies ended up developing on, say, their fat cells, every cell in their body. So like fatty acid translocase, any glucose transporters, all of that type of stuff, they have more on top of all of the surfaces of their cells than how any of us would. Because in kind of the dearth or lack of energy or calories coming in that environment, they had to be really thrifty with it. So after the Dutch hunger winter, whenever they started growing up and actually had access to food, like whenever like Reconstruction and all that stuff started happening, they started storing all of the food. Sorry, that's I was listening to a podcast. My bad. Back to where I was. Whenever they got older, they had so many nutrient transporters, they were so efficient at storing body fat that all of them were overweight and obese. Is that interesting to anybody? Right? Like super counterintuitive. So whenever you're having kids, should you starve yourself right now or should you eat a bunch of food? Maybe, like probably not, but like it's you know, just like go on and do like whatever you want to do with your life, right? It's but like there's an idea to it. So kind of what's displaced the idea of like Lamarckism. Has anyone ever heard of the term epigenetics? Epigenetics? Yes, so Medina has. Okay, so I want you to know what epigenetics means. So if you have never seen the word before, cool. Everyone knows what epigenetics means? Wait, no, sorry, I just asked that. Pay attention, me. Sorry, cool. All right, epigenetics. Above or beyond genetics. So this is essentially how things in the environment can alter expression of certain genes. So a term that, I don't know, like might be cool for you to know as well would be methylation. Any of you bio people, did I spell that right? I did? Cool, thanks, Matt. Excellent. So, however the environment is, can either turn on certain genes, certain stress genes. So in this Dutch hunger winter example, not having access to food turned on nutrient transporter genes to have an overexpression of them so that they're more thrifty or efficient with storing body fat, because if you don't have body fat and you starve, you die, right? Everyone good with that? Now on the other end of it, and there's actually more research to this now, that individuals that have like type 2 diabetes or are severely overweight or obese, they start methylating certain genes that are more positive. So methylation, how I want you to understand that in terms of any gene that you can possibly have, that means turns off a gene. Now, it has a more technical term, meaning that like it puts a methyl group on like a histone and all that type of stuff, but that doesn't matter for this class. It just means that it turns off a particular gene. And actually, recent research showed that like sperm cells within overweight or obese males seems to methylate genes associated with nutrient metabolism and like different things like in the mitochondria, making people more aerobically fit, so that if an overweight or obese individual has a child, it's less likely that they will be super aerobically fit. Does that make sense to anybody? Right? It doesn't really make sense to me, but I think it's fairly interesting. Cool? Excellent. Excellent. Cool. All right. Moving on. So what does all of this have to do with exercise? And this is where I'm going to start talking about one of our papers, so please read it, the Booth paper. It has a lot to do with exercise. Hopefully everyone understands that. So exercise or physical activity has played a crucial role in human evolution because we were essentially always doing it. There was never a time whenever individuals were not exercising. In fact, modern day hunter-gatherers, I want you to guess. A male and female modern day hunter-gatherer, how many miles do they walk and or run every day? Over 20? No, like that's a really good guess. That's a really good guess. I like that, Dwayne. Good. Anyone else want to venture a guess? Over 30? Okay, now that's getting ridiculous, but okay, yeah, that's what's up, Alec? 16? Okay, that's a little bit closer. So write this down. This will probably be a question. Modern day male hunter-gatherers walk or run about 9 to 9.5 miles per day. Female hunter-gatherers a little bit less, about 7, 7.5. And there's reason to believe that that is relatively constant. Meaning that modern day hunter-gatherers probably are functioning in a fairly similar way to how olden time hunter-gatherers did. How do you think you would be different if you traversed 7 to 9 miles every single day from here on out? What's up, Ari? Well, I'm not sure stronger would be the word, but more endurance, I would say. Yeah, yeah. That's good. Because like there's an interference effect with those two things, but whatever. It's Nick, what's up? Yeah, like leaner, probably greater aerobic capacity. If everybody like went on average 8 miles more every day, or like just 8 miles, not 8 miles more, like 6 miles more than that 2 that I said, do you think diabetes would be a thing? Probably not. I mean, maybe type 1 diabetes, you know, through some like autoimmune, like beta cell, like pancreas thing breaking down or whatever. What about heart disease? Do we think heart disease would be a thing? No, like I don't really think so either. Do you think obesity would be a thing? Would that be a problem in our society? No? It's so like every summer, I like make myself walk 9 miles every day. And well, like that's why I'm skinny. So that's cool. Yeah. So it played a crucial role. And humans have been relatively unchanged biologically since back then. And this is from some various fossil records. However, I will say that there is some argument that there's like an exponential increase in like evolution right now due to like modern technology and things. But like I'm gonna have to see more things being replicated on that. So overall, we evolved in a highly stressful environment where there wasn't a lot of food. We were running all the time, fighting each other. Like you didn't know where like good water sources were. So if another tribe was at a given water source, you fought them in order to get it. In fact, there's some evidence that like around going from like, I think it's Homo erectus into us, like whatever the missing link is, that like our orbital bones got a lot thicker, indicating that people started punching each other in the face a lot. Is that kind of cool? right? So like everyone learn how to box because that's, I don't know. That has nothing to do with this class. I just thought it was cool whenever I was reading about it. That's, yeah. So if you can't take a punch, that means you didn't evolve right. Cool. Evolved in strenuous environments. Here, some numbers that I want you to be like aware of. On average, we have declined from burning 49 kilocalories per kilogram to 32 kilocalories per kilogram every day, with the onset of like being sedentary. So just like putting some like legit numbers on this, that's, you know, around 3,500 calories, right there, 3,600. So like 175 more calories than a pound of fat, if you didn't know, to 2,400 for a 75 kilogram person, 165 pounds in American Freedom Units, if you're not aware. Do you think that, what is that? That's like 1,200 calorie difference from like hunter-gatherer times to now? Is this crazy to anybody, right? Like if you started burning a lot more calories, right? I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but like I think this is all important for you to know, like where you came from, right? You didn't come from Germany or Ireland or anything like that. We all came from Africa and we were running. That's where everyone came from, right? Fighting lions. I don't think there's bears in Africa. Are there? No? Oh, so look it up. Cool. Okay, going on. Like, those figures are from Booth et al., 2012. Really cool guy, Frank Booth. I love him. I got to meet him. Pretty awesome guy. He points out some big things in his paper that I want to cover for us. So the basic framework for gene regulation was selected for during an era of obligatory, meaning you have no choice, physical activity. Being sedentary is equal to death in the modern environment or any environment. Really, back then is what Frank Booth is talking about, that if you were sedentary, like in the Fertile Crescent, well, you got eaten or you got killed, or you didn't chase down whatever animal you were supposed to, or you didn't find sufficient calories in the environment. So overall, like I'm kind of arguing that enjoyment of physical activity was inconsequential. So if anybody actually likes physical activity, well, like, I mean, that's cool and everything, but the data somewhat indicates that people don't meet minimum requirements. If anybody remembers from like health appraisal and exercise testing, whenever people are actually measured with like, I don't know, Fitbits and things like that, what percentage of people actually meet the minimum 150 minutes of moderate physical activity per week? Hannah remembers 5, around 5%. So that's out of everybody. Around, I don't know, what was it? Like 50% of people say that they actually do meet them, but like most people don't. So I think that is kind of interesting. Here, I wanted to talk about like a new term that myself and a couple of other professors are trying to put into all of these classes, the term anti-fragility. So you've probably heard in other classes that, you know, it's good to be resilient and all sorts of things like that. Like everyone's heard this, right? You know, like the self-esteem era, I mean, all of you grew up in it. I kind of did too. So like, oh yeah, being resilient's good. Kind of a distinction made here. Like I'm going to use the analogy of a cup. If something is fragile, like if a cup is fragile, it's made out of glass, you throw it on the ground and it shatters, right? That's kind of how we would use the term fragility. Is everyone good with that? Okay, resilient, that's like a plastic cup. You would give a plastic cup to a child or, you know, any of you with your red Solo cups and all that type of stuff. If you drop it on the ground, it doesn't break. It's fine. You can pick it up. You lost all of your alcohol, but that's okay. You can get more because it's Wisconsin. There's a lot of breweries. Now, the anti-fragile term. Does a cup get better by you smashing it on the ground? Interestingly, humans do. We get better by getting smashed. That's what anti-fragile means. So if anybody, well, like obviously I'm going to talk about this because I'm from Texas and Houston, we have a problem, right? So a lot of NASA stuff there. So much research about bed rest, going up to space. If you don't have gravity on you, you lose muscle mass, you lose bone mass, you lose your mind, whatever. Not really, kind of smart, I guess. They wouldn't accept me, I was too short. That's actually not true. I never went to Houston. What's up, Robbie?
To your question about bears, there's no bears in Africa. They used to be back in the, there used to be like
Back in Pangea days?
Yeah.
Okay,
They
cool.
got extinct back in the 1870s.
All right.
Northern Africa, they're called the Atlas bears.
Atlas bears, okay. So I'm going to breed some and take some back. All right. But back to this anti-fragile thing. If you don't stress a system, it goes away. So everyone's heard of if you don't use it, you lose it, right? Right? That's what anti-fragility means overall, right? So here, something that Frank Booth points out, genes evolved with an expectation of a certain threshold of physical activity, which essentially is just a disturbance in homeostasis. I'll define that in lectures to come. Gosh. Actually, I'm going to talk about Thrifty Gene next time. I think we ought to have our first pop quiz. Sound good? So pull out a piece of paper, put your name on it, put away all of your stuff.